are listening to KPCA-LP. You can tune in at 103.3 FM, or you're already there, or we guys have a live streaming at kpca.fm. So I'm very excited because today is the first day of my candidate interviews. If you have not heard, I am going to be interviewing all of the candidates for City Council as well as the mayoral candidates. So I'm just going to start out by giving my little spiel that I have. And so what I did want to add is that you can check the full schedule for the who is where and when. The interviews are stretched out over the next 3 months. So you'll be able to see the schedule at kpca.fm, and that'll give you all the details about when every person is going to be on. So what is expressed here does not reflect the opinions of KPCA or PCA. No endorsements will be made over the air. The second half of the show will be opened up for public comment or questions. So I sent out a set amount of questions to every candidate so they kind of knew what the first half of the show is going to be, and then the second half is open to public questions. You can find us, so there's 3 different ways. You can email questions to DOMAYNE@maberme.com. We are accepting questions via phone at 707-981-7577. Or if you're on Facebook, you can ask questions on the DG the 30-something page. And that is where also you can see the live video feed. So the phones are being answered with my content producer, and so that's who the voice you will hear when you answer the phone. For the purposes of these interviews, we'd like to keep the questions to those who address the future issues and the candidate strategies to address them. We'd like to stay away from questions regarding political affiliation, voter history, or the like. And all the questions will be asked anonymously to avoid trying to figure out who wants to be anonymous and who doesn't. So let's get started. That was my spiel. And also, I did want to add, if you have questions specifically for me, you can address them at that email. If you have questions specifically for the candidate after the show, I'm going to be posting all of their contact information on my website, so please direct that directly to them. So, let's get started. I am going to let my guest introduce himself and give us a little bit of history and why he's running for City Council.
Well, that was a fine spiel you had there, and my name is Kevin McDonnell. I've been in Petaluma since 1985, and I've been involved in community activities since then. I raised 4 kids in town and been involved in everything that kids get into in town, and along the way found myself in leadership positions of this and that, and eventually being president of the Petaluma Youth Soccer League for a long time, really working there with the kids. And then as your kids get older, you realize you need adult-centered hobbies rather than just kid-centered hobbies. But the skills you got are the same skills you need to move up, which I did to the Park and Rec Commission or to other activities in town. That's a lot of me. I'm sure you have a question. I can tell you special things about me that other people might not know, like I still play in the adult soccer leagues, right? And that's kind of fun. I've done the full Grand Fondo, and all you bicyclists out there know what that means. I've also supported the youth Fondo, so the kids Fondo. And I've actually hiked on Lafferty, which is a nice opportunity for the city if it ever comes about. And I support all the open space proposals that are currently in play through the open space. But just lots and lots of involvement in town, and it's those kinds of things like I started Know Before You Grow, a citizens education forum, to help us know before the developer comes in what exactly we can talk to them about and how to advocate for the best things for our neighborhoods. And I also co-chaired the Measure X campaign, which was a measure that helped us get improved park and recreation facilities in town. So yes, been busy.
All right, and I should warn our viewers and our candidates that I am constantly looking down because I am monitoring some of the questions that are coming in. This is how I'm receiving them from outside the studio. So if I'm looking down, that's why. It's not that I'm not paying attention. I also have to watch the clock. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. So, what policies, strategies, or the like do you propose to manage the rapid growth in Petaluma while preserving the small town and the historic charm?
That is interesting, because right away you phrase growth as rapid. Like, why do you call it rapid? What is the impact that you as the questioner have, or are you trying to judge the public perception of what growth is? What I think we're feeling is it's much more crowded. Did it grow all at once? Probably not. Petaluma's had some really progressive patterns of growth to limit the rate of growth, but cumulatively, it really adds up. And cumulatively, you really see the impact. It's that old compound interest thing. If you put away a little every year, you end up with a nice nest egg. If you grow a little every year, pretty soon it really, really adds up and changes. And if you do the right things along the way, if you have the right general plan in place and build the right transportation infrastructure and sewer infrastructure, all the components that add nice communities, you build the right parks, well, then you're kept up with your growth. What we haven't done is we haven't kept up. Our roads are failing. That's not a good thing. And it's not the growth today that caused the roads that are failing in front of our streets. It's practices of the past. So, and it isn't that we necessarily had bad policy. It's just we had bad implementation, bad practice. And so there's three parts to why I'm running for council. One is I really, really love Petaluma. It's a really, really fun place to be. And two, well, we didn't get things right all the time in the past, and we really need to work on that. The third, yeah, there's decisions that get made about the growth and future of Petaluma, and we have to be sure not to make the same mistakes we made in the past, but to leave Petaluma a better place for having been here.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think you touched on, I didn't know if you wanted me to answer the question about rapid, but I think you kind of touched on what that looked like. So, and what...
An interesting thing, too, is people equate growth with traffic. If traffic is bad, it must be because of people. But actually, it's not directly correlated to people. They're connected. Right now, we call it a housing crisis, but there's not a housing crisis for cars. We have off-street parking requirement, garage parking requirement, and on-street parking requirement. We cater to cars, which brings more and more of them into town. In future development, we want to try and reduce the number of cars and reduce the number of miles that get put on those cars.
Awesome. All right. So let's move on. And if you do ever have direct questions to me, I'm happy to answer them. But just let me know. So what additional issue not addressed in the last question or something you want to expand on is high on your list to address if elected into office?
Well, the first thing is, and my campaign is based on housing. We have a housing crisis, right? It isn't affordable, it isn't available, and it's creating all kinds of problems. And the reason I pick housing as a main topic is because everything else is related to housing. If people can't live where they work, they drive. If they drive, we have traffic problems. If they drive, we have environmental problems, pollution problems. These are all because we didn't plan a town that was livable for our people. And in addition, if people can't afford their housing, what happens to their food choices? They make poorer food choices, you get poorer health outcomes. Statistically, you can find the mortality of people in each zip code because of the housing pricing of that zip code. And the same is true of educational outcomes. If people are working two jobs, if they're putting too much effort and money into their housing, then what happens to their educational outcomes? They decline. Third, it really changes our demographics in our city. If young people can't afford to live here, suddenly there's less and less kids, and it feels different. It's not the town we want.
Alrighty. So you've kind of touched on this already, but given the upcoming general plan updates, and I always think upcoming within the next 5 years. I kind of, when I ask these questions, I'm thinking kind of in a broader perspective, not, in the next 6 months. So where do you see Petaluma in 10 to 15 years? And, I guess kind of what impact do you see yourself, if elected into office, having on that?
Right. Well, we're moving right through the first half hour quickly here. There's so many things to touch on. I mean, one of the things is we really need to get that smart station at Corona built. Too often South County doesn't get its fair share of resources from many of the county agencies, and that's an important thing that we need to do. I kind of glossed over traffic and roads, things like that, and we'll come back to general plan in a second. But we just have to finish the freeway. You see people cheating all the back streets, coming in D Street, coming up Lakeville, coming down the boulevard, coming up McDowell, because the freeway doesn't work. That has to be a top priority. And I know that city's working hard on that, but we need to keep putting more and more effort on the state agencies, the county agencies for transportation to make sure that funding happens. One of the key things on that is this November there'll be a ballot issue for gas tax. They're talking about rolling it back. That would be horrible for town. The highway wouldn't get done. If the highway doesn't get done, then Rainier doesn't get done. If those don't get done, the traffic doesn't get better. We really have to have that outside money. It's the only source of street paving monies right now. So we need to keep having that money in play. But again, Corona is a big next step. SMART's working good, but we need to build it out to what it was promised to be. So yes, on the general plan, I see it in 10, 15 years, this Petaluma, it is a beautiful city. I think it'll continue to be a beautiful city. We've balanced our history and our culture, and we must preserve that feel. Part of what I've done with Know Before You Grow is had a walk on the streets. We organized groups, because when they go to developer meetings, they'd say, well, this development doesn't feel like Petaluma, but they couldn't put words to what feeling like Petaluma was. And so what we tried to do is give people the vocabulary they need to help advocate with development that's coming in. And what it turns out is people like to walk. They like to walk to shops. They like to stroll on shops. If the streets are strictly car-centric and people aren't comfortable being so close, like anywhere in Washington, people don't stop. It doesn't feel good to be a human there. So we need to make sure that everything we build out is built towards more walkable. You see the same thing in the Leghorns Park area, with a shopping center right next door and housing built around it. That was a development, whole major area done right. So we can do things right, and we need to make sure in the next 15 years and the next plans and stuff that we continue to do things right. But we don't need to sprawl to the edge of town. We don't need development that encroaches on open space. We need things that are near the downtown smart station. We need to fill in the gaps of what we've done. And I think we'll get that with infill development, but the policies that we implement have to get us to that next good place for Petaluma.
So I heard a couple things that I would like you to expand on for the audience. So you talked about Rainier, it's the first one, and then you talked about the potential gas tax rollback. And so I'm wondering if you can just get, because viewers may not be too familiar with both of those issues, if you could just expand. I don't know how well developed the gas tax rollback is. I've definitely heard about it, but if you could give any more information on those two issues, just for the audience, for those who may not know about those two proposals. Right.
So we've had a state fund recently that put SB1 that puts a lot of money back into all the city's hands for fixing roads. And that's one of the main topics I get asked about and complained to about as I meet people around town. And I'm trying to be out, I know my friends are going to vote for me, but that's not enough. I need to meet more people. I need to have my friends' friends. I need to have people I don't know yet think enough of me to vote for me. And so I'm out talking to people. And one of the things they say is, our roads are awful. And why can't we fix them? Well, one of them is it's a funding question, and a lot of that funding is currently from the state and Senate Bill 1. And that has, my understanding is it's been placed on the ballot for November to repeal that funding source. Now, that could take away a lot of the current work, and I don't think we're paving streets fast enough right now. So that was one of your two questions. Your second one was?
Rainier.
Ah, Rainier. Right. Of course. Well, Rainier is such an amazing thing. For 50 years, it's been in the works. And for 50 years, it's been chopped and sliced 100 different ways. I think the public really needs to get a chance to see what it really is. And that's coming around because the city's put $7 million into this right now. So the city is committed to Rainier right now. We want to see it go forward. And by the end of the year, Caltrans will have reports back to us on what the project will be and how it'll all work. So we're moving to have really good steps there. But what we really have to do is figure out, what does Rainier cost? Where will the funds come from? When will the funds come? Because I don't want it to be another 50 years before we build it. We have to show the public that we can either find the funds or be creative in getting it solved in another way. But mainly, where do those funds come from? And if it's local money, are we willing to put that local money into it? Are we willing to take it out of other local projects? Government's complicated. You don't just ask somebody if they want candy, and of course they say, oh, I want the candy. You have to say what all the consequences are, what the complexity of it is, and hopefully you have government that can synthesize that and give good data, make clear presentations to the public. As an engineer, I kind of have a leg up and advantage in this arena. I've worked with Caltrans before on a number of projects. I've worked with SMART before. I know how their processes work. And so I can read plans. One of my campaign taglines is, I actually know how to build bridges. So that's, it's more than just a cute line. As an engineer, I can see these things and see how they're supposed to work. I can help see where the gaps are. And in any project, there's gaps and hopes. And to get them built, you have to fill those gaps, and you have to fill those hopes with real facts. And that's where I think we're headed on Rainier. Let's get the real facts on the table and have the people say, yes, this is the thing we want to do at this price, at this time, and with this all these other factors in mind.
So that actually leads to, you kind of touched on this, going a little bit off the script here, but we can end with any more comments. So how do you feel that the city can better address this idea of transparency and outreach? I personally know my family's lived here for 24 years. I've spent most of my life here off and on. And so I'm just wondering how, what strategies you foresee. You did touch on, giving the real data and sharing that with the community. So how can the city improve their transparency through outreach or whatever method?
Sure. The city has many issues. And often we only focus on the Rainiers or developments. And regarding development, that is why I started Know Before You Grow, because I didn't feel like the city's process to have citizen input on developments was adequate. The citizens can't come to a meeting when the architecture is all done and the road is all laid out and be asked to give critical input. That has to happen sooner. So what we're trying to do is try and get the people to understand that there will be a development ahead. At the developer-driven meetings, there's often conversation about paint color, window types, and that is not what's key in a development, right? So you want to be involved at a much earlier point. So we need a policy that does that. It shouldn't be the responsibility of a citizens action group to reveal that. On another topic, there's the fairgrounds. Let's just wade into all kinds of fun and exciting topics here rather than
Why not? Why not?
Rather than you pull them out, I'll volunteer on this.
Go for it.
The city's currently in negotiations with the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds has a very sweet deal for city-owned land, and the city is broke. The city needs more money out of the fairgrounds proposition, and they know that. And the fairgrounds lease is going to end shortly. But the city doesn't demonstrate its strength. It doesn't demonstrate its competence in this arena by advertising to citizens its progress and how it is one of the ways that they're trying to solve the financial crisis. There has to be more outreach coming out of the city, a more declaration of the things that are good that the city does, right? If you do good, but you hide it, then it's the same as not doing good. When you don't tell people what's going on, they assume the worst. So we need to communicate better on all these different fronts. And even on bad news with the state of the city's budget, it's important that the public understands. Otherwise, the public thinks the city is them rather than us. We need to know we're all in this together.
So that actually brings up another question. I'm going to put up my public health hat on now a little bit. So where I grew up is actually is currently the poorest census tract area in Petaluma. And it's on the east side. It's not super important to my question where exactly it is, but we know that there are low opportunity populations in Petaluma. I like to say low opportunity versus disenfranchised or all the other words. And so I'm really wondering, when you compare that district to like the Cherry Valleys of the west side, which are very wealthy, not only is there this huge disconnect economically, but it actually has some pretty significant health outcomes, like the life expectancy is lower in those poorer areas. So my real question outside of that is, how do we get more buy-in from those who don't necessarily feel that they have a voice or that they aren't involved? And I don't want to put words in their mouth of why that is. I think there's a lot of reasons. But how can we bridge this divide? I always joke with a lot of my friends, a bad joke, I grew up on the east side and I live on the west side now, but there really is this break at the train tracks. And so how do we really bring the two sides together, get people involved that haven't been involved, and I know it's a complex issue, but how are some of the first steps that you would address, how to address this?
Right, that's a good question. I think it's an astute observation that there is sort of two parts to Petaluma, and you can slice the two kind of however you want to slice it. You can slice it on a demographic level, you can slice it on an economic level, health outcomes. These are all truths, but in the most part, there's two sides to what we're looking at, and you need to figure out where the bridge is between the two parts. What is it that keeps one section the way it is? And you have to work within city resources, and you have to try and extend where you see good needs to occur to make that bridge reach. The more I get involved in this, the more I see that the problems are so big that they're bigger than our town. But I do think the people we deal with and the friends we have are our town. It has to happen here. We need to show initiative here. There's little things you notice around town about the good people do. When someone stands up against a bully in town, that's a really positive step, and that should be acknowledged. And with our social media the way it is, that it gets acknowledged pretty quickly. And more examples of the good in town need to be shown. And I've long been a inclusionary person. When I was with the soccer board, we had out of town English coaches come to town for summer camps. And anybody with an English accent is just so cute and darling. They love them. But the camp was for boys and girls. And so I called the British people, who are mostly professional soccer players, and I said, there must be a woman coach in this group. You cannot just bring all these boys on their summer vacation. You need to have a woman as a role model for the women in this group. And they did. There was no contract unless they did. And I think that's a demonstration of strong leadership. Similarly, sitting on the city board, the city discussed how well they ran a certain program, and how many personnel were involved, how much community was served. And I asked, in all the interviews, the staff you recruited, how many bilingual parties were there? And that was not a question they'd had to answer previously. it's important that you ask those questions. It's important that you acknowledge that privilege exists, and it's not an earned right. It's a thing that doesn't belong in our public programs.
Well, so to this end, and you kind of, I don't mean to be redundant, but we have a very low voter turnout in Petaluma, which is, especially in the midterm elections, which is really kind of shocking to me, because at face value, we see the city that is so active and people really want to be involved. I think it was, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was around 24% of those who are eligible voters. So I'm just kind of wondering what you are doing during your campaign to potentially address this issue. I think it's a huge issue. It's a national issue. We know that. But right here in Petaluma, it's strange to me because we seem at face to be such a giving, nice, philanthropic, active community, but we know by data that that may not be the case.
Well, I think a lot of what you observe is you, as an engaged person, are attracted to and form a community of engaged persons. And similarly to me, I thought everybody would vote this way because all my friends said that. I'm in an echo chamber. You're in an echo chamber. You hear this noise. But when big data shows that the voter turnout isn't what we thought it'd be, or that our candidate didn't get elected, we're surprised. We need to reach outside of our little communities to broaden our community, to be inclusive of a bigger group. Now, right now, I think in Petaluma the voter turnout might be higher. We might need to check some of the numbers we're knocking about here, but certainly it's going to be higher this fall. The engagement in politics in general, because of the federal trends, you'll notice a much higher local participation. And since the local participation has always been strong amongst older voters, what we're going to see is a stronger youth vote in this next election, which is why one of the things I'm doing is trying to form youth groups to support my campaign. And it's nice having two 30-something children living in town and all their friends, because again, I'll need their friends and their friends' friends to all help get me elected this year. But it is the youth vote that's going to come very differently this year. And you have to have an issue that engages them. Because mostly, when you're young, you're building career, maybe you're building family, you're very busy, very, very busy, and you don't really get why a city council is that important. But if you're not engaged in it, the activities that create your town are created by others. You want to have a hand in that. You want to be knowledgeable of that. And that's why I think we need to really engage with our youth voter demographic.
Well, and so just to answer your question, I speak a lot on my radio show about looking outside the bubble, and I've worked in communities all over the world, so I don't tend to think within my bubble. I am very engaged, and the reason I do so is because I want to get the millennial generation involved. That's why I'm DD the 30-something. That's why I really embrace that idea. And I know some of the major disconnect I feel as a millennial is, this is my personal experience and the experience of many of my peers, is that, like you said, we're not speaking the same language, but further, how campaigns are run are actually not speaking to the generation. Millennials are the largest eligible voter base in the nation right now. So, like I said, you kind of touched on it, but I'm wondering, like, perhaps specifics of how you reach these younger populations, and we're talking about 30-year-olds and 25-year-olds. We're not talking about real young kids. So maybe you have one example of how, like, we know they have to get involved, but what is a strategy that you're actually using to get them involved?
It's a one-on-one connection thing. I mean, social media is good, but what we find is that social media and is just is one tool. It's the knock on the door. It's not a bond that lasts. Bonds that last would be when your friend recommends me and you meet me and we have connection that way. So there's more of that needs to happen in the specifics. You know, we're looking at, it's very early in the campaign season. There's 90 days to the election, but you know, we're looking at having house parties where people host me and invite their friends. I have young friends who invite me in. You know, they ask a lot of questions. But it's interesting, what is the particular issue of the young person?
Mm-hmm.
and that's a legit question, not rhetorical. You know, because when I go around town, everybody kind of blinks a little. They're not sure at any age what the city council can do unless they've already been politically engaged. But the things they will say is that, well, housing is trouble and traffic is trouble. And those are almost, they're not personal. You know, they're just observational in their impacts, but it's not something people have spent a lot of time on, unless you're already engaged, in which case you have strong opinions on things.
Right, and we know that in presidential elections there's a large voter base, and so that's part of why I'm here, is to help people understand why it's so important and how local elections actually impact your life more in a lot of ways than national elections. Not that doesn't come down at some point. So, all right, I did get some questions before. So, this was a big one that I got, and I also very much believe, I was on the tech committee for a while there. I'm going to be brash, but I think, a lot of people would agree that the city's technology is very antiquated. Their social media has gotten better, but I've heard commentary about, I'm a renter and I own a house, so I don't have to deal with this, but I've heard that paying your water bill, for example, is really antiquated, and they don't know how to manage if you prepay or if there's a credit or you overpay. So that's just an example. I'm really interested to know, and I know, yes, the city is strapped, but I see this as a major way to get to people. The website is not responsive, which means when you're on your phone, for the viewers, if you're on your phone or your tablet, it doesn't automatically resize, which is what we consider is the standard of web design now. So, and of course, I've been told over and over it's too expensive to do. For me, it's worth the investment because then you're reaching people with information. I do most everything on my phone. I do very little on my desktop unless I'm sitting at my desk in my office. So I'm just wondering, and I don't think there's an easy answer to making this technology not quite so antiquated, but I guess my question is if that's on your radar, and again, I ask that because I do think it's a better way to reach the younger population and kind of what that looks like for you.
You're right there. I mean, it's important to the younger demographic that they be social media, that the city be social media connected. That is, when you want to communicate outward, it's necessary that the city have a respectable type of web presence and not an impenetrable static web presence. And it needs to be more business friendly to its processes so you can have that, and that's important. The question is what's the priority of this task versus this task? And in this time when the city is dead broke, they have hard decisions to make. Now, one of the good social things they have, or good internet things they have, is the website for Petaluma, where you can log any complaint for any type of activity around town from an app on your phone. I can hold this up to the Facebook people at home here. It's kind of nice being both on television and Facebook broadcast as well as radio. But they have a very fine app.
You can share the name too.
Yes, and so they you can connect with them on Facebook. You can go to their public works efforts and log anything that's wrong. Like, I noticed a sign for Lynch Creek Trail that was pointing the wrong direction, and it's kind of poor but simple to fix. So I logged that in. Then the city is very responsive on how fast they get out there, and if they don't get out there, they ping you right back and say, well, it's not today's job, it's next week's job. So that's a nice thing they have. The other really cool thing the city has is the city has GIS inside GIS, and there is a public portal to GIS, which
do you want to explain
information systems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now I know the tech committee knows all these things. And probably personally you've seen all this activity, but the kind of things that the city can do with a GIS system, where it's a geographical interface. You can ask it questions like, this hill is this steep, and there's this much rain falls on it. What are the odds that you get a landslide from too much water on that particular hill? Or you can say, business in this area does this much business from tax revenue we know, and there's all kinds of queries. The data sets that are available nationally about our area are amazing, and the queries are limited by imagination. So the city's moving in some good technological areas, but when they have so little money, it's really a challenge to make the big broad steps that are needed to keep up with, call it the worldly thing. And as a neighbor to Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and the overflow of that mentality pushes into our area, it's a hard catch-up game to play with such wealthier, more tech advanced communities. But we're seeing that here with internet ordering of foods and things. It all happens into our area. It's just not happening as fast as we might like.
So the app is called Engage Petaluma, and I was a part of the app development. So I am very excited. That's when I was on the tech committee. So please check it out. It's a really cool resource that you can use to, if there's a road, what am I trying to say? If there's a hole in the road, thank you.
Yeah.
If there's a pothole in the road, you can address that or anything. I saw a sign right in front of City Hall that was a truck upside down. It was supposed to be no trucks, but it was upside down. So it was actually really comical. I have the photo somewhere, but I did the commentary that no upside down trucks were allowed on that street. But anyway, it's those things that you can address or submit to the city, and they are really responsive. So that is a really cool resource that we have.
And that goes back to my point about taking credit for the things we're doing well. I mean, not that many people know about that, and the city did a rollout and showed people that but quickly it kind of fades. People's engagement levels fade. So it's important that if you want a technology, an app to work, that you drive traffic to it. So communication, that this is the way to connect with the city. It works. I see on Nextdoor and other sites all the time, who knows why this water tank's in this place? Who knows whether there's this in the water system or why there's traffic at this? There's many questions the city can answer and don't have to be crowd answered on Nextdoor. On Nextdoor, you usually find someone, post them a link to the city's website. The city is trying to provide the data. They're just not good at making the connection. That's the thing that we need to have the city work on.
And I do have to give the city a shout out because their social media has gotten great in the last couple of years. It's really gotten a whole lot better. And then the other thing I wanted to say about that too, and I talked a lot about it on my last show, is contact your city clerk. The clerk's office is incredibly responsive. You generally will hear a response within a day or two. If they don't have the answer, they will send you the person that does. And I think that that's a really easy solution, and I think it's actually more clear than using social media because you don't know what the bias is going to be, or you don't know what that person's experience is with the issue. They might be mad about potholes and give you some crazy answer about, I don't know, some crazy answer about potholes. We've all seen that on social media, whether it's Nextdoor or Facebook or Twitter. So given that, you can just contact the city clerk. If you have any questions about Petaluma-based issues, just shoot them an email, all the contact information. I wish I knew it off the top, but I don't want to give the wrong email address. So go on there if you're looking for information to this end. She can give you all the information that you need from the city clerk's office. So let's go to the next question that I already forgot off the top of my head. We're trying to look up that midterm voter rate, by the way, because I do want to fact check. That is what I remember from it. And so I'm wondering if there's anything else that you haven't touched on that you're interested in touching on, or any further issues that haven't been addressed.
When you walk around town, people ask you something different every day in every neighborhood, and what you find out is that not everybody shares the same opinion on any particular subject. They don't all think the most important thing is traffic. They people have different takes on things. Some people are really excited about the condition of the pavement in town. Well, excited would be the exact wrong way to describe it. They're pretty distressed. The pavement's distressed, the people are distressed, but they don't see a path forward. and that's the thing that we need to put in front of people is a path forward. And there's a lot of belief that something should happen, but a little less engagement in how to make it happen, and to put the burden on someone else to come up with solutions. And it doesn't work that way. If you want solutions, you need to be participating in solutions. And so I'd like to see more community discussion on realistic outcomes, so that people invite in people who know how to get things done and say, okay, so here's our problem. Show us the path forward here on this. And that's what we're looking for when we talk to people. That's what people don't know how to get from their concern to a possible solution. We need to show them paths to possible solutions.
Alrighty, so okay, I'm trying to get that. Oh, there we go. Okay, multitasking at its best here. Yeah.
You're amazing. I'm watching you work, and it's amazing.
I'm trying really hard. It's always managing so many pieces at once. So, I'm a business owner in town. My office is downtown. Parking is quite the issue, but that is not what I'm asked about. So, or I guess it's included. One of the major things I hear from especially young business owners is the lack of economic development or the lack of foresight towards economic development in the city. I often talk about how I'm a non-traditional business. I'm not a brick and mortar kind of company that do get the news coverage, that do get the recognition and various outreach. So I'm wondering, how you feel about economic development, support for companies, especially small companies. I know we have these great medium to larger companies in the city, but I do often hear that a lot of small businesses do feel left out of the loop. And really the second part of that question is that we know that our local newspaper is not what it used to be, and that's no knock to them whatsoever, but being published once a week, how do we elevate these companies that have made this investment to being started in Petaluma?
Well, I think Petaluma is very supportive of small business and Petalumans, but it's a question of whether there's policy or staffing that does that just as well. It is tough to get permitted to open a business, and it's nice to be non-traditional, where you can go to work, where the workspace is the modern answer to building out your own space. So you're familiar with what I'm talking about. Work. It was in this same building we're having this radio show.
Yes.
And
down. Yeah.
And then they have other offices over. Is that 4th and at the corner of A in Kentucky there, and that is a bit of a model for new and small business. But even so, building the next level business up, it's very difficult to get permits. And when it takes time to get permits, it means your business is extended without any income. Maybe you've rented a property, maybe you've got the architect's plans for how the interior remodel should go, and that's cash you've put out and are losing money on until you can open your doors. It's important that business permits happen quickly, and there has to be an accelerated process for that.
So I know you talked about parking availability earlier, but as a downtown-based business owner, I find it very difficult for my clients to find parking, and it's very difficult for me to find long-term parking. If I'm in the office, I'm on the corner of Kentucky and Western, so we basically rely on the Keller Street garage, which is not great shape, and it's owned by the city. So, I don't think this is an easy question, but as a downtown business owner there, parking is a giant issue, and I think most people in that downtown corridor would agree, and we're also paying an additional tax.
Right, because those businesses built that parking garage. It's the assessments on those downtown properties that build that, for the benefit of those downtown properties. That was the answer at that time, right? You still pick downtown Petaluma to open your business. I mean, I'm amazed at your optimism, and I think that's really cool, but mostly it speaks to what a good place it is to live and work. Now, there is a challenge on parking, but you find the downtown business people being creative to try and find solutions, being creative in trying to fund solutions. It's not the kind of thing you dump back on the city and say, well, we need a new parking structure, because that's just, I mean, it's not viable at the moment. It could be viable long term, but that doesn't solve your business problem today. That's the real issue. And as the economy gets better here, and we see more people opening businesses, they'll mostly be non-traditional. I have a real concern for retail in town. Though it is what we like to do, walk and shop, the more we buy on Amazon, the more we buy elsewhere, it's a real challenge for retail. So retail is very stressed in this town and all across the country. But we need to facilitate businesses having what they need, but we need to meet with business to decide what they need.
So where do you envision these small non-traditional companies to go, since there's a very limited amount of small office space, especially on the west side, and there's very little left on the east side? So to be more business friendly, to me, would suggest that there would be space for these companies. So is it just co-working spaces, or what does that look like?
Well, most people don't want the government getting in the way of making their decisions. Most people say if there's a market and it can be created like that the private sector, the private property owners have the incentive to create the business. What can't happen is the city can't be the impediment to being a successful business. The city has to facilitate good things happening in town. Now, by saying that, it's still all within general plan requirements. You don't put residential in an industrial zone. You don't put commercial in an industrial zone. You build the city the way you plan to build the city so that it works well. But mainly, if there's competition for an office space, that's a good problem, because that means it's a desirable place to be. And we want downtown Petaluma, or all our business areas, to be desirable, that people want to be there. One of the things that comes up with this, people saying that housing isn't affordable, and I'll relate this back to business in a second, is that when they say it isn't affordable, what they mean is to them or the people they want to live in community with. Mm-hmm. Somebody's paying that money and making it unaffordable for us, for me, right? And the same is true of business, a business competition there. But what happens is it provides an incentive for growth of a space for the next business to be in. And so long as there's a plan that allows for that and not too much regulation impediment, then the city can grow and businesses can thrive.
Okay, we're trying to figure out registration versus turnout. So as you know,
we're Googling, aren't we?
We're looking at the Sonoma County Registrar, but in the fly, I'll make sure that we'll find it at some point, and I'll make sure to post it.
Good, right. And I think you're right, though. Your basic premise of we have a low voter turnout, I wouldn't argue with that. We have a low voter turnout. And then, do we need a better? Yes. And I think it will be this November. I think we'll have a real strong turnout this November.
Well, I would definitely agree with you on that because of everything that went on in the national elections last time. So, getting back to, I did have a question. So, that Keller Street garage is owned by the city.
Correct.
And the upkeep is very subpar to what I would consider acceptable. And I know that the city is strapped for money, but I feel as a downtown business owner, that is a huge takeaway for being a downtown business owner. So, how can we address that? I mean, there's got to be a way to address that, and I don't even feel comfortable parking there after dark. So, how do we kind of address those issues? So not only, it's full on the weekends all the time, which is a consideration, but, how do we address those issues of safety and cleanliness? And as far as I'm concerned, that garage represents our city.
Right.
So,
that's a good point. When people look at the streets, they make judgments. If they come into town and they see a sad street, a trashy street, then that's an opinion they take away from it. Now, luckily, Petaluma is very attractive. The businesses have kept and property owners have kept the downtown looking and feeling great, except you do get in little side corners, like the garage you mentioned, not so good. But we are a major attraction now. You go by the Smart Station on any weekend afternoon, and you see a steady stream of customers getting off the train and heading over to Brewster's. We are an attractive area, but that doesn't happen accidentally. We have to put energy into staying attractive. And so when there are problems, we need programs. But to have a program means money in a city that has no money. So we need to be inventive of how we solve our issues.
All right, I'm still trying. Give me 1 second. I know it's sometime. I'm good at multitasking. Okay, like I said, I know for sure I saw that. Sonoma County. See, the county was 50%, but I'm trying to figure out. Anyway, like I said, I will try to find that because I'm interested not in the presidential election, but in the midterm. So I want to make sure that I find that information.
Midterms are usually so much less than the presidential election. Absolutely. This year, it's going to be higher than a standard midterm, but presidential elections is where everybody comes out.
Yeah, totally. And that's what we're trying to differentiate. So I'll have to search through the Sonoma County Registrar. But I remember I was really shocked, 4 years ago. And a lot of the articles actually talk about nationally about how it was the lowest voter turnout in 72 years or something crazy in the last election. And I think that was reflected, in this county and in the city. So, and that's of eligible voters, usually not registered voters. So I believe, again, I want to check that out because I don't remember all the specifics because I haven't looked at it in a really long time. I haven't looked at it in 4 years. So 3.5 years. So I'll definitely get that answer for everyone because I believe in giving accurate data, and I always like to be corrected if I'm wrong.
Well, in talking about newspapers and the media like you had earlier, I just want to give a shout out to the Argus. I mean, newspapers are sort of a dying breed. They're in distress. The internet is gobbling them up, much as Amazon is gobbling retail. Newspapers are challenging. But in the Argus, we have a real gem for local opportunity. If you want to have local dialogue, not only in their paper presence, but on their online presence, and I'm not ready to quit them quite yet. Our news sources come from many, many diverse places. They don't come from our single newspaper anymore. We don't have that allegiance, but nonetheless, it's nice to have a local, much as it's nice to have KPCA, where you can talk about local issues and have them voiced. It's important to have a local paper that, and even if it's an e-paper, and we get it online.
Oh, and I'm totally not trying to knock the Argus. For me, it was for me more elevating what they're doing, and quite frankly, I'd like to see them to get the funding back. Like, I know hard newspapers are a hard sell, but I would hope, and again, this is a very complex business issue, really, but I would like to see that even if it is on the internet, elevated again, because that was something that we had, daily.
Right.
I mean, that was many years ago, but I'd like to make sure that is not gone away. So I agree with that entirely.
And they do provide another service. They provide is they'll have a candidates debate night. They'll chair with the chamber. I know are you chamber member?
No.
Oh, and oops.
No.
But the chamber and the Argus put together what can only be done at a local level, and so both those organizations really serve a good purpose for the local citizens.
And I don't know when that is, but that's another thing I'll add to the schedule. I'm sure they've released the date, so
I think they're working the date out right now.
Okay.
It'll probably be late September right now, but they're working the dates out right now.
Okay, so as soon as we know that, I will make sure to post it for you all, because those debates can be really valuable information. So, and there aren't too many actually. Relatively, there aren't a ton in town, so it's good to catch those. We don't want to completely overwhelm our candidates with debates and interviews. So, since we're nearing the end of the show, I was just wondering if you have any closing things you'd like to say or anything else you'd like to share.
Thanks for lobbing me a softball here. I mean, because yes, I do. I want to say the website is Vote Kevin McDonnell, and Kevin McDonnell is the McDonnell part is McDonnell, which is a little tricky, but everybody can find that. And I've been involved in everything around town for 30-something years on City Parks Commission, City Youth Commission, City Arts Commission, and as an engineer, I know the structural issues that are coming up and need to be addressed, and I think I'm uniquely qualified for this opportunity. Thanks for having me in this interview tonight.
For sure. Well, and thank you for joining me. Again, I am going to be posting all the contact information for the candidates, and I will make sure to include their websites. So I think everyone has one, as well as all the other contact that I got from the city clerk. I will assume that that's accurate. Website. Well, I'll add the websites because I know that's not included, but emails and phone numbers and names. So I will be getting that hopefully by the end of the week onto my website. In addition, these live videos that you found, I mean, if you're watching it right now or you're listening right now, you know what's up, but all of these videos, if you have people that are looking for it or want to refer to it, will also be on my website by the end of the week. My website is dominica.ninja. So my name spelt is DOMENICA.ninja. And you just click on the radio show link and you will be able to see this video. So again, if you have further questions for me, specifically, you can email me at domayane@maberme.com. And if you have questions specifically for the candidate, please contact them directly so I don't have to be the middleman. And as a reminder, you are listening to KPCA LP at 103.3 FM, and of course, you can live stream us at kpca.fm. Have a great night. Alrighty.
That was fun.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Those are good questions. I'm glad you were pushing on the youth thing and
Oh,
the
yeah.
downtown business thing.
Well, and that's my whole, I mean, that's the whole reason I do my show, right? Is
Totally.
and that's, people, there's a lot of millennials that, don't like to own that